Thank you very much. And I must say I'm having a great time. This is been exactly everything Scott and I always plan with these things to do. And but my topic is not so much of a fun topic, and I hope it will connect with Nias's work, because I think it will, knowing her work. It's about philosophy and its role in its contributing role in what I call the invasion complex. Sense that Western society, in particular around the world right now, is feeling like it's being invaded by terrorists, refugees, etc., etc. And what's that nexus between global movements, sovereignty issues, and the scapegoating of migrants? And I'll be talking about one particular philosopher, and I want to stress that it's a particular philosopher, because not all of philosophy is added to this, but there is a particular tradition that this philosopher represents, which I think allows me to say it's not just a quirky example. That's Peter Sloterdijk. And the reason why I'm speaking about Sloterdijk and this topic to you today is, not only I hope it connects with Nias's work, but the person who was meant to be here was Alex Lambert. And Alex and I have been talking about Sloterdijk all year. So in his absence, and due to his bereavement, and like Scott, my heart goes out to him. He's been an enormously courageous man and a very beautiful person. And this is a very testing moment for him. But in his absence, I thought I'd give this paper and to him in a way as well. So, this question of the invasion complex, how does it manifest? Well, I've just given some brief examples about how, in the media at least, there's no shortage of examples of how refugees, asylum seekers, etc., are presented as these invading hordes. But beyond that, we also see how the ideas around multiculturalism and cosmopolitanism have also been in decline, and in fact, we witnessed a backlash against them. In Europe, we've had, let's go back to your depression moment, Donald Trump and his Mexican wall that Mexicans will be paying for. But even before Donald makes these comments, we have the former president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, saying that the hijab must be banned, which it has been, because the republic was at stake. Angela Merkel saying multicultural approach of let's coexist and enjoy each other, it's an absolute failure. David Cameron, the former British Prime Minister, saying state multiculturalism is a wrong-headed doctrine that has had disastrous results. Really? The republic's at stake? It's disastrous? And really, are we saying that we can't coexist together? Is that really what these three public leaders have to say about civilized behaviour with strangers? On the same note, here in Australia, we had our former Prime Ministers, Howard, Rudd, and now Turnbull, coming together in one sentence. We stop the boat and we control who comes into this country. We control who comes into the country. This famous statement by John Howard, we stop the boat, was Tony Abbott's mantra. Turnbull, because he's supposed to be a supremely intelligent man, can add up 1 and 1 to make 2, and joins these two phrases to make them 1. So these are sort of the symptomatic expressions of what I will call the invasion complex. And this research project that I'm referring to is one that I've done in collaboration with Remy Khan and Audrey Yu, another colleague in another collaborative project. And so now I won't go more into those sorts of accounts of those examples of how this media or this discourse has been mobilized, but I want to sort of talk about how this kind of political discourse also connects to a kind of civil debate about mobility and hybridity, about fears of segregation and ghettoizations, about ideas of cultural purity and contamination. And how, when you drill into these debates, and there's a report that the Conservatives have released in the UK about fears of segregation in the UK once again. if you look carefully at that report, it's the perception of segregation, once again. And it echoes an earlier report where the former chairman of racial equality said, "We are sleepwalking to segregation," famous statement by a Labour perspective. Now, the realities are quite the contrary. The only segregation is in some all-white neighbourhoods. The levels of mobility of our migrant communities is as high as others. The levels of contribution to charity is above the national average. The levels of civic participation, again, outperforms the sort of so-called Muslims are talking about. So this idea that Muslims only want to marry themselves, marry between their own culture, is not true. That they live in ethnically segregated places is also disputed by the facts, and that their contribution to society is completely contradicted by examples like charity and civic participation. So, do we now have an argument with our state leaders and say, can't you really add up? Can't you read the statistics? Why are you so obsessed with these perceptions and anecdotal versions? Because they'll tell you, oh, this rings true, because I have an experience of such and such a person who works around with a hijab and never talks to anyone. And so on and so forth. So this anecdotalization process has become rampant, and a sort of kind of attempt to drill into and really examine what the statistics and experiences and everyday lived realities is ignored. In our research project, we found similar findings in Australia. People do find creative, interesting ways to get on. In fact, what we've discovered in our research here in Australia is this huge disconnect between the rhetoric and the performativity of invasion complex at the federal level in particular, and the everyday practices of creative coexistence and cultural exchange, and at the local level of government and governance, innovative responses towards these challenges. So the local political discourse, if you call discourse both practice as well as just talk, is in fact far more sophisticated than the federal, which is often operating around ideas of transnational crisis management discourse. And that disconnect between the federal view and the local experience is a kind of surprising and important discovery. So our challenge at one level could be to say, hang on, let's calibrate and quantify and therefore speak back to this federal discourse in a ways that counters and contradicts and clarifies and reaffirms what the truth actually is. Okay? So we could do that normative discourse of saying, hey, hang on a minute, you know, the facts are, and let's go through this in a reasoned kind of way. But what we've discovered with Trump and everything else, we live in a post-reasoned society, feelings are more important than arguments, and so this deliberative, reasoned approach may not necessarily win the argument. Maybe we need to win the argument through other means, through aesthetic and cultural forms. And perhaps what this tradition of philosophy that I'm going to now talk to is doing that. It's not actually doing philosophy. It may be doing a kind of aesthetics. An aesthetics that talks about the centrality and primacy of place, and about the presupposition that our human nature is one of violence and destruction, and that our tendencies as humans is towards misanthropy. It's a lot I've just thrown at you. Kind of negative perspective. Now let me open it up and explain it quickly. A writer called Peter Sloterdijk, who I've been fascinated with for 20 years, and Alex and I have been talking about all year. Peter Sloterdijk is a German philosopher, one of probably the most well-known German philosophers in the world. He's at least as famous, if not more famous, than Habermas in Germany. He has his own TV program. His books are bestsellers, and he's prolific. He's a modern-day Diogenes in some ways. One day he wants to be this free-loving hippie, the next day he wants to be in an ashram, the next day he's purifying himself, the next day he's this sort of right-wing authoritarian. So, you know, it's not exactly consistent. But he's interesting otherwise. Not just because of his colourful style, but also the breadth and sweeping nature of his arguments. And he's not an idiot. He's very well informed and an enormously intelligent philosopher. But he is fundamentally a contrarian. And he's come to the view that globalisation, and it's interesting because I think Nikos and I've already had this conversation, where there's this whole perspective both from the left and the right, where globalisation is conflated with cosmopolitanism. But globalisation to him is homogenisation of cultures. And humanitarianism, welcome cultures to refugees, etc., is an abrogation of national self-will. So if you put the two together, globalisation and humanitarianism, then you have the collapse of both the state and the weakening of the self. Because openness for him is purely an opportunity for the other to invade you and destroy you, and that the natural state towards the other is of violent destruction and misanthropy. So this is the prior assumption that he operates from, because he believes that all of us, and he has this sort of very sophisticated way of putting this, and simplifying a whole range of arguments which appear over about a dozen books, whereby he believes that our fundamental sense of identity comes from our primal experience in the mother's womb, where we have total bliss of being unified and united with this total environment, and in that natal state, all is good. Culture is meant to replicate that natal state where all is good. All is connected, all is unified, and your identity is solidified. Because culture can't do that completely, one has to be forever vigilant. Vigilant against what? Intrusions, infractions, anything that breaks the immunized system that culture is meant to produce, that is meant to reproduce the fundamental experience of the womb. So what we have with culture is a position about unification of identity and place that is fundamentally opposed to hybridity, cosmopolitanism, and hospitality to the other. You can't have both. You can't have culture, which is meant to produce unification, if you also want to be open to the other. Open to the other merely exposes you to their position, their views, their worldviews, and the point of them imposing those being exposed to those counter worldviews is that at the very least it contaminates yours, and in its ideal scenario for the other, it overtakes yours. It colonizes you, and you surrender and give in to the other. Now, to his credit, he doesn't only extend this logic to refugees, he also extends it to the poor of his own country. The poor of his own country, who he says believe that they are entitled to welfare, are in fact the similar kind of curse on their culture as the refugee is. Because both of them are coercively demanding accommodation of their self-interest. The poor demand entitlements, the refugee demands entitlements that the state must provide. In other words, the state should feel guilty about those who don't already have self-sufficiency. And he says there is this discourse in Germany today where, whether it's welcome refugee culture or welfarism, that the rich must bow to the poor, and that there is a risk, therefore, in German culture right now, that the rich will lose their elan, their drive, their will, their purpose for conquest, entrepreneurship, and all their drive will be dissipated by this guilt towards the poor. Now, I'm surprised he says this, because I would have assumed that Sloterdijk would have met a few rich people by now in his life. He's been a rector of Karlsruhe University. All the rich people I've met don't have a drop of guilt in their body. they've never felt ashamed about how much money they have. And the last thing they do have is a problem with their ego. But he somehow thinks that we must defend the ego of the rich against this parasitical and coercive force of the poor and of the outsider. So, underneath all this is an assumption that place needs to be protected. Place is like a sacrifice. It is like an artifice of the womb, remember. And place needs to be protected because our first order condition as humans is towards destroying the other. And if we don't destroy the other, we lose the integrity of our values and bonds to our particular sense of place, where our holistic and universalizing worldview is formed in. So, Sloterdijk doesn't feel obliged to provide any anthropological evidence of these misanthropic tendencies. He relies on the assumptions that what is represented in the media is therefore the truth. And so he sort of circulates and perpetuates a lot of these myths rather than truly provides a reasoned argument. But there's a fundamental flaw in his argument, which he himself has already exposed in his other writings. Because when he talks about zealotry, the zealotry of Christian fundamentalists, or the zealotry more prominently of the Muslim, he says the only response to that is to have a kind of second order institutional defense system where you learn through your encounter with the other the benefits of mutual coexistence. So in the face of zealotry, in the clash of civilizations with the Muslim or Christian fundamentalists, we should be good Kantians, he effectively says. That is, learn that through moral, reasoned argument, we can find ways of coexisting. And through that, develop what he calls third way institutions, which are the product of these encounters. Now, on the one hand, you could turn around and say, wouldn't that be nice to impose that kind of thinking on your own commentary around the refugee story? And I say, well, for consistency, that would help. But it wouldn't, in fact, destroy the whole foundations of his philosophical quasi-Heideggerian perspective, which is the primacy of place and the primacy of misanthropy. So, I'm now, in the longer version of this paper, I'm going to go on to talk about, because this is a position I would characterise as antagonistic cultural policies, cultural philosophy, and contrast it with Chantal Mouffe's agonistic version of cultural philosophy, which itself is not satisfactory, but is an interesting counterpoint. But putting that aside for the time for the purposes of brevity, I will now just simply say, what if this second order condition, that is the moral and aesthetic response to violence, isn't a second order, but is another first order condition? What if openness isn't a sign of weakness, but is the basis of renewal, strength, innovation, survival? Now, these two what ifs that I've just put, would take us to the core of his philosophical perspective and would challenge the way in which, in a sense, philosophy enables this political rhetoric that I began with to have purchase in the public imaginary. Right? So if we only counter it with facts, we haven't undermined the foundations. If we answer back in terms of fact, oh, but these Muslims are good, we still haven't countered the argument that our natural tendency is to be suspicious, violent, and destructive. But if we say that our capacity to be curious, our capacity to be interested in the other, our wonder of difference, our ability to feel empathy and to have ethical relations with others is not a second order social construct that we learn because of the good philosophy of Western civilization, but is also a fundamental response to being in the world. In other words, it's not a second-order social product, but it is a first-order process of being. So I would turn and say, in fact, that our whole discourse on cosmopolitanism, from the Kantian moment onward, and Miasa and I have had long debates about this post-normative vision, but the Kantian moment onward tried to defend cosmopolitanism as a second-order condition, as a good mechanism that operates as a brake against this first-order tendency towards violence and destruction towards the other. Learning to behave, learning to be good, learning to be responsive, learning to follow the laws helps us all get on. And I say that's fine, but maybe that's not enough. And maybe it's obscuring something even more fundamental, which is that, yes, I'm sure, like many of you, want to kill their brothers and sisters, etc., etc. But I also have a capacity for genuine curiosity and ethical interest and pleasure from that is not a second-order product, that is derived from training the imagination to behave properly, but is a first-order experience, and through which one has a way of being in the world which is open to the other. And as my friend Gerald Running says, it makes us not individuals, but individuals. Because we are constantly constituted through the flow with others and relations that we develop. That's the infrastructure that Danny was talking about, and that's the kind of questions that I think many other traditions and versions of philosophy also talk about. I'm sure you could think of many examples. Jean-Luc Nancy, Cornelius Castoriadis, they all talk about creation and cosmos from this perspective. There's a fascinating new tradition from Marilyn Strathern onwards, from feminist philosophy, which again talks about how subjectivity is constituted in these kinds of open relations with the other. Which brings me back to the fieldwork that Audrey and Remy have conducted and I've collaborated on. What we found is that in everyday environments, at festivals, outside events, where people linger, meander, weave their way in and out of different kinds of encounters, look at each other across distances, flirt, maybe brush shoulders, hang out together. In those kinds of events, people get on. Their first impulse is not necessarily, how do I kill them and rape them and steal from them? Maybe it's just like, hey, that looks nice. And if that's a first order response that coexists alongside the others, what mechanisms and what discourse and what vocabulary do we have for representing that back to our political imaginary and our public discourse? So these are the questions I'd like to put to you, and this is the kind of commentary I think maybe Miasa will now step up and take forward, but I'll hand it over to Frank to